An adult elephant can weigh several thousand kilograms. That means one elephant contains enough meat to feed a huge number of people. So why don't we eat them? We eat cows, pigs, chickens, goats, sheep, and even horses in some parts of the world. But the largest land animal alive barely appears on a dinner plate. And that's strange because humans have eaten elephant-sized animals before. Thousands of years ago, our ancestors hunted mammoths. Archaeologists have found butchered mammoth bones with cut marks from stone tools, some more than 12,000 years old. Entire communities even use mammoth bones to build shelters. So eating an enormous elephant-like animal was once completely normal. Somewhere between then and now, that changed. And the obvious explanations don't quite work. Maybe elephants are simply too big. But that can't be the whole answer. Whales are far larger, and humans once built entire commercial industries around hunting and processing them. Cattle are enormous compared with chickens, yet humans slaughter hundreds of millions of them every year, so size isn't the real problem. Maybe elephant meat tastes terrible, but people who have actually eaten it describe something very different. Accounts from hunters and communities that consume elephant meat describe it as tough and dense, sometimes compared with very lean beef. It's not exactly a food people universally consider inedible, so taste isn't the answer either. Then maybe the problem is something much more practical: spoilage. Before refrigeration, killing an elephant created a ridiculous problem. Imagine bringing down an animal weighing several thousand kilograms in the middle of a hot environment. You now have an enormous carcass. A small hunting group can't simply cut it up and store it in a refrigerator. The meat has to be butchered, preserved, transported, or eaten before it spoils. And unlike a cow, an elephant produces so much meat that processing the entire animal becomes a race against time. That gets us closer, but even that isn't the complete answer. Because the biggest problem with elephants isn't what happens after you kill them, it's what happens before. Elephants are incredibly slow to reproduce. A female elephant carries her calf for almost 22 months. That's nearly 2 years of pregnancy. And after giving birth, she doesn't immediately produce another calf. There can be several years between births. Compare that with cattle, which can produce a calf roughly every year, or chickens, which can produce hundreds of eggs in a year. If you tried to raise elephants for meat, every animal you killed would take an extremely long time to replace. And that changes everything. A meat industry needs a reliable supply. You need animals being born, growing, reproducing, and replacing the ones that are slaughtered. Elephants simply don't work that way. Their populations grow slowly, even under favorable conditions. So if humans kill elephants faster than elephants can reproduce, the population doesn't recover. It collapses. And humans have already seen what happens when elephant populations are pushed too far. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, elephants across Africa and Asia were killed on an enormous scale. But here's the strange part. Most of those elephants weren't killed because people wanted their meat. They were killed for something much smaller: their tusks. Ivory became incredibly valuable. It was used for jewelry, carvings, piano keys, billiard balls, and countless other products. The tusks were worth so much that the rest of the animal could become almost irrelevant. An elephant could be killed, its ivory removed, and its enormous body left behind. The meat wasn't the reason for the killing. The ivory was. And that created a devastating cycle. The more valuable ivory became, the more elephants were killed. And because elephants reproduce so slowly, populations couldn't keep up. By the late 20th century, elephant numbers had fallen dramatically in many regions. In 1989, international trade in elephant ivory was banned under CITES, marking a major shift toward protecting elephants from commercial exploitation. Suddenly, killing an elephant wasn't just about whether the meat was useful. It was about whether killing the animal was legal at all. And today, elephants remain under serious conservation pressure. But there's something important here. If elephant meat were completely forbidden everywhere, that would seem like the end of the story. Except it isn't. People in some parts of Central and West Africa still eat elephant meat. It can appear in bushmeat markets, particularly when elephants are killed illegally for their ivory. The meat may be sold or distributed afterward. And that tells us something important. The idea that elephant meat is somehow universally disgusting or culturally impossible isn't true. The taboo isn't the same everywhere. It's shaped by geography, law, culture, economics, and history. And there is another reason elephants never became livestock. They are extremely useful while alive. For centuries, people across South and Southeast Asia trained elephants for labor. They carried people, moved heavy objects, transported materials, worked in forests. And, historically, They were even used in warfare. If an animal can perform valuable work for decades, killing it for a one-time supply of meat doesn't make much economic sense. A cow can eventually become meat after spending its life as livestock. An elephant can spend decades performing work. That completely changes the calculation. And then there's another factor that has nothing to do with economics: culture. In parts of South and Southeast Asia, elephants became deeply connected with religion, royalty, and tradition. In Hindu tradition, the elephant-headed god Ganesha is one of the most widely worshipped deities, associated with wisdom and new beginnings. In cultures where elephants have carried soldiers, helped workers, appeared in ceremonies, and occupied religious traditions, the idea of killing one for dinner becomes almost unthinkable. And there's an even deeper reason modern people often feel uncomfortable with the idea. We now know much more about what's happening inside an elephant's head. Researchers who have spent decades observing wild elephants have documented remarkably complex social behavior. Elephants live in family groups. They communicate through a variety of sounds. They remember locations and individuals. They can recognize members of their social groups after long periods apart. And researchers have observed elephants interacting with the remains of dead members of their herd, touching bones and skulls with their trunks and sometimes remaining around the remains for extended periods. Scientists have also reported evidence of self-recognition in elephants. That doesn't mean elephants think exactly like humans, but it does make the animal much harder to view as simply a giant pile of meat. And that's where the question changes again. At the beginning, it sounded like a simple food question. Why don't we eat elephants? But the more you investigate, the more the question becomes, why would we? They grow slowly. They reproduce slowly. They require enormous amounts of food and space. They're extremely difficult and dangerous to manage. They can be valuable while alive. Many societies have deep cultural relationships with them, and their populations have already been damaged by centuries of hunting. Even if elephant meat tasted fantastic, almost none of those problems would disappear. And there is one more strange exception. In a few countries where elephant populations in certain regions have become large enough to create serious conflicts with agriculture and local communities, governments have sometimes allowed tightly controlled hunting. When an elephant is legally killed in such situations, the meat may be distributed to nearby communities instead of being wasted. And that creates an almost bizarre situation. The places where elephant meat can legally appear are not places where elephants are being raised as livestock. The meat is often a byproduct of wildlife management. The goal isn't to create an elephant food industry, it's to manage a wild population while making sure the animal doesn't go to waste. And that distinction explains almost everything. Humans don't eat animals simply because those animals are edible. We eat animals when the entire system around them makes sense. They need to reproduce quickly enough. They need to be affordable to raise. They need to be manageable. They need to fit agriculture. Their meat needs to be transported and sold, and society needs to accept them as food. Cows check those boxes. Chickens check them extremely well. Pigs check many of them. Elephants fail almost all of them. And that's why their enormous size, which initially looks like their greatest advantage, becomes almost meaningless. A 4,000-kilogram animal sounds like an incredible amount of food. But if that animal takes years to reproduce, enormous resources to support, and decades to grow, the calculation changes completely. One elephant may contain an enormous amount of meat, but a population of elephants cannot produce replacement animals at anything close to the speed of livestock. And once you add conservation, law, culture, economics, and history, the idea of farming elephants for food starts to look almost absurd. There is also a darker lesson hidden inside the story. Humans didn't simply decide one day that elephants shouldn't be eaten. For much of our history, humans hunted enormous animals for survival. Mammoths were food. Other giant animals were hunted. Elephants themselves have been eaten in different places in different periods. What changed wasn't our ability to eat them. What changed was the world around them. Modern humans pushed elephant populations down through hunting, especially for ivory. Then, after bringing those populations close to collapse, we had to build laws and conservation systems to protect what remained. The meat was never really the main story. The tusks were. And that's why the question isn't really about whether elephant meat is edible. It is. The real question is whether an elephant makes sense as food. And after looking at the animal's biology, its slow reproduction, its enormous resource requirements, its cultural importance, its economic value while alive, and the damage humans have already caused to wild populations, the answer becomes surprisingly simple. We could eat elephants. We've done it before. Some people still do. But elephants were never a good replacement for cows, chickens, or pigs. Because the largest animal on land isn't valuable because of how much meat it carries. It's valuable because of everything it can do while it's still alive. And perhaps that's the strangest part of all. An elephant may be carrying thousands of kilograms of meat. But after thousands of years of human history, we've learned that putting that meat on a plate is probably the least valuable thing we can do with the animal.